20 tips I wish I knew at level 1 in Arc Raiders. Let's go. Tip number 1, understanding your enemies. This is probably the longest tip of the entire video, so if you already have a good understanding of how each enemy works, feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps below. At launch, there will be a dozen different arc threats that you'll need to familiarize yourself with, and each one of them brings a unique threat to the battlefield while also having unique weaknesses. First up, we have ticks, pops, and fireballs. These enemies are typically found indoors, with ticks being the lightest threat of the bunch. These tiny little spiders will jump on you when you're least expecting it and deal damage over time, but you can pull them off using the interact key and kill them pretty easily. Next, we have pops, which are lightly armored units as identified by their white metal coating, so they're pretty easy to kill, but are extremely fast and disruptive. They'll rush towards you with the lone goal of exploding at your feet, dealing substantial amounts of damage. Fireballs, on the other hand, are more heavily armored units that take a bit longer to destroy, but are also noticeably slower. These aim to disrupt your looting and combat indoors by lighting raiders on fire, but can be quickly destroyed by shooting the weak point that opens up as it begins to use its fire attack. Next, we have snitches. These are lightly armored airborne units that act as a police drone for the Ark. If it detects you, it'll begin calling in reinforcements that can only be stopped by killing the drone fast enough. If you fail to do this, it'll call in some of the next enemies on our list, starting with the Wasp. This is another lightly armored airborne drone with mounted machine guns that can really mess you up if you're not careful. You always want to aim for their rotors, as these are weak points that can disrupt their flight pattern and cause them to crash and burn. Next, we have the Hornet, arguably one of the most terrifying enemies on the list, as these heavily armored flight units, as you can tell by their black metal coating, will electrocute and stun you in place for 2 full seconds while dealing high damage. And while heavy ammo can penetrate these higher tiers of armor, I still recommend focusing on the back 2 rotors that are far easier to destroy. This leaves us with the big boys. These are the scarier, more heavily armored units that deal fatal damage and typically require an entire team to take down. First up, we have the Bastion. This is a slow-moving, tank-like enemy with a fully automatic turret that aims to suppress you with continuous fire, even when behind cover. And while it may seem indestructible at first, you'll actually notice these yellow weak points on its leg joints, as well as this cap on the back of its shell. Breaking these weak points will slowly break it down and eventually allow you to kill it. Next, we have the more lightly armored cousin of the Bastion in the Bombardier. This is an arc unit that specializes in long-range heat-seeking missiles and is typically accompanied by a spotter drone that will paint raiders as an enemy target for the Bombardier to follow up on with pinpoint accuracy. This has similar weak points to the Bastion, so aim for the kneecaps yet again. Next, we have the Leaper, a larger spider-like enemy that has been making waves on social media for vaulting itself at players from what seems like miles away. And when it lands on you, it'll perform an AoE slam attack that will likely kill you if you're caught in its radius. To limit its movement, you want to aim for the kneecaps yet again to try and dismantle its legs, or aim at the eyeball to deal substantial damage. The scariest elite level enemy is the Rocketeer. This is a heavily armored flying saucer of death that deals extreme amounts of damage and typically guards high tier loot zones and extracts around the map. This shoots 2 rocket projectiles at a time and can typically only be dodged with a forward leaping roll. If you want to fight this thing, you'll need copious amounts of heavy ammo and a coordinated team to try and pierce the armor covering its thrusters, which is why I recommend avoiding these in the early game entirely. And lastly, we have the Queen. This enemy is in a league of its own as the first world boss in Arc Raiders, and is something you should avoid at all costs until you're much later into the game. She protects a harvester that is used by the Ark, an encounter that contains several high-end crafting materials and weapon blueprints as rewards. It has multiple attacks and can attack you from crazy ranges, and typically requires more than 1 squad to take down, which is why we'll likely end up making a separate guide for her later on down the line. Tip number 2, the skill tree. These are passive ability points that you unlock every time you level up, giving permanent upgrades to your character over time. You need to be careful about which skills you choose, however, because as far as I can tell, there hasn't been a passive skill reset feature in any of the previous playtests, so choose wisely. We actually have a deep dive of the skill tree and recommended pathing dropping later today, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to see that type of content. Tip number 3, understanding weapons and ammo types in Arc Raiders. Weapon archetypes typically dictate what type of ammo your weapon will use. You obviously have shotguns using shotgun shells, SMGs and pistols using light ammo, assault rifles, light machine guns, and snipers using medium ammo, with most single-shot weapons like hand cannons and lever-action rifles requiring heavy ammo. There are a few exceptions to these rules, but they're pretty rare. You also have legendary weapons that use energy ammo, but you likely won't come across them until much later in the game. Light weapons are generally pretty strong against enemy raiders, but have low penetration against heavily armored Arc units. Medium ammo is a decent all-around ammo type for both raiders and Arc alike, while heavy ammo is a high-risk, high-reward type of ammo that is generally paired with low rate of fire weapons, with the trade-off of high damage per shot and high penetration against heavily armored units. Weapons have a durability stat that will need to be managed between raids, and you can even upgrade weapons and find higher rarity attachments that can help them perform even better or give them unique effects. Tip number 4, bring way more ammo than you're used to. The Arc are everywhere and are extremely aggressive when they're alerted of your presence. This means they'll relentlessly track you down, and Arc enemies do quite a bit of damage, so it's often better to fight them instead of just trying to run. Except Rocketeers. In the early game, always run from Rocketeers. Even if you learn to target the weak points like we covered earlier in the video, you'll still burn through quite a bit of ammo, and you should always try to have extra reserves available should you need to take on players. Tip number 5. Sound is arguably one of the most important aspects of Arc Raiders. There are so many different sound cues that you can take advantage of, and you should always be listening. From car alarms to metal detectors, security cameras, sniper turrets, alerted Arc robots, and even shots going off in the distance, everything can be used to your advantage. The more of these you can avoid when approaching points of interest, the more likely it is that you can catch another team off guard or loot a high-tier loot zone undetected. And what most people don't think about is the fact that you can purposely leave some of these security systems untouched, letting them work for you and against your enemies. Tip number 6 is all about the free loadout feature. When you're broke and running low on weapons or healing items, you can opt for a free loadout that gives you a random kit with basic necessities after loading into a raid. This is a great way to eliminate risk while trying to restock on materials, or even come out with huge profits that you scavenge off other players. Keep in mind that these are extremely basic kits with minimal ammo and healing supplies, so you'll need to be careful about how you maneuver about the map. Tip number 7, valuable early game resources. Fabric and Arc power cells are some of the most valuable early game materials you can find. You use these constantly, and if a couple raids don't go your way, you'll probably run out of them. Fabric is the lone resource needed for crafting entry-level bandages, while Arc power cells are used to craft shield rechargers. Fabric itself can be found pretty commonly while topside, with several other items recycling down into Fabric as well. Arc power cells are a bit more scarce, as you need to be intentional about looting Arc threats that you've shot down. And while Scrappy does loot some basic materials for you, it's not enough on its own to sustain your healing and mats over time. So make sure you're actively looting these resources while topside, and you'll have a much smoother experience early on. Speaking of shields, tip number 8 focuses on how shields actually function in Arc Raiders. Unlike other PvP games where shields act as overhealth like in Apex Legends and Valorant, the shields in Arc Raiders offer damage reduction to the amount of damage you would normally take to your base health. This creates some interesting gameplay mechanics when healing, because you can still die when taking damage while your shields are active. This is why I recommend that you always heal your base health first, followed by your shields when in combat. The light green shields reduce damage by 40%, but have the smallest shield size, or what they refer to as charge, at a value of 40. The medium blue shields have slightly higher damage reduction at 42.5%, but have nearly double the shield capacity at a charge value of 70. The heavy purple shields have the highest damage resistance by quite a substantial margin at 52.5%, but only have a slightly higher shield capacity than the medium shields at a charge value of 80. The higher grade shield that you wear, the larger movement speed penalty you'll receive, but this penalty can be reduced by the use to the weight passive skill early on in the conditioning tree. Tip number 9. Knowing what to keep, sell, and recycle is one of the hardest parts of Arc Raiders. We'll be diving much deeper into inventory management over the coming days, but at a high level, loot has a ton of different categories. You have the obvious ones like weapons, ammo, and shields, but you also have less intuitive things like valuables and topside materials. Valuables are strictly used for monetary value, so you can always feel comfortable selling these. Topside materials, on the other hand, are much harder to distinguish because they can either be labeled as recyclables or as topside materials when they're actively used in crafting recipes. You also have higher rarity materials that can be used in more advanced crafting recipes, but can also be recycled down for additional lower level components, so it can be a bit confusing at times. Luckily, the game does a good job of telling you what each material can be crafted into, which definitely helps a bit. So as a good rule of thumb, keep at least one copy of each craftable material until you absolutely need to break it down. Tip number 10. When space gets tight in your backpack while looting topside, you can recycle items down into more commonly found resources such as fabric, for example. So instead of carrying around higher tier recyclables that all break down into the same thing, you can just break it down on the fly and immediately save space in your backpack to loot other things you find in raid. It's also important to utilize the quick move feature as often as possible because dragging and dropping individual items takes far too long and creates larger vulnerability windows while looting. But if you use control click on mouse and keyboard and X or square on controller, this will instantly move items into your backpack and significantly speed up your looting. Tip number 11. When you return to Speranza and are in need of additional space for your loot, you can actually upgrade the size of your stash by clicking this easily missed expand button at the top of your inventory. This will steadily increase in price over time as you make your stash larger, up to a maximum of 200 slots if you own the base version of the game. Tip number 12. When you drop into a raid, it's crucial to plan your route. If you have a quest item tracked for a specific resource that you need to obtain, you can actually hover different POIs to better understand which ones will contain those materials. While it's important to know where you're going, it's equally as important to know your exit. If you have an objective across the map, try to identify nearby extraction points and how long they have left on their timers for a safe extract. These are variable extraction timers that can change raid to raid, and if you're not paying attention to these, you can easily end up missing your extraction window. You then put your life at risk by venturing across the map to an entirely different location and potentially losing your loot to either Ark or another team. Tip number 13. Stowing your weapons significantly increases your movement speed while simultaneously draining less stamina. It's easy to do this when traversing long distances, but incorporating this into your more combat-focused moments will make a drastic difference in your overall movement speed and stamina management during PvP engagements and difficult fights with the Ark. Tip number 14, next up we have the dodge roll. This movement mechanic is great for dashing in and out of cover during a fight or avoiding big hits from enemies, but what most people don't know is that it can also be used to reduce or completely negate fall damage from certain heights. In this example, I dodge roll and take 0 damage while my teammate forgets to do so and loses a bit of health. Do keep in mind this only works up to reasonable heights, so don't get too crazy with this idea. Tip number 15, trigger discipline. It's easy to see a target and instantly want to take a shot, but in a game like Arc Raiders that has a longer time to kill, there are moments where it's actually better to take the extra second and 3-2-1 an enemy target with your team. Rushing your shot can give enemy players the opportunity to reset behind cover or result in deadly interactions with tankier Arc units. So if you have the jump on a team, capitalize with a coordinated first push and you can instantly shift the dynamic of a fight. Tip number 16. While on the topic of PvP combat, shoulder swapping is one of the most powerful mechanics you can use in Arc Raiders. This allows you to swap the hand that your weapon is in and grants a far better perspective when peeking around corners. This is vital in third-person shooters because when you don't do this, you leave yourself much more exposed during combat. And something else to keep in mind is that you typically want a right-hand peek whenever you can. Arc Raiders uses a default right tilting camera similar to other third-person shooters, which naturally tilts the perspective of your character to favor their right-hand side. This often gives the advantage to right-hand peeks because, as you can see here, peeking from a right-handed perspective allows my body to remain behind cover while still being able to shoot my weapon. But when I swap shoulders and try to do the same thing on my left side, the rocks block the barrel of my gun, requiring me to be more exposed. Tip number 17, understanding enemy flares. If you see enemy flares popping up in the distance, you always want to count how many have gone up into the sky to determine what type of situation you could be approaching. If you see 2 to 3 enemy flares, for example, there are 3 likely possibilities. The first is that one team of players was completely wiped out by another, the second is listening for bastions and rocketeers that could have wiped out enemy raiders, and the third is that 2 teams are still actively fighting each other, especially if you continue to hear gunfire, with a couple members from each team that have already been downed. And pairing flare information with audio cues will give you the best chance at predicting the scenario correctly. Tip number 18, understanding spawn locations is extremely important. Map spawns are consistent locations in Arc Raiders, so understanding where you've spawned during previous raids will help inform you about where potential threats could be coming from. Tip number 19. There are no damage numbers or hit markers in Arc Raiders, so when fighting enemies, you'll need to rely on visual and audio cues to understand how much damage is being done. When damaging an enemy raider's shield, you'll see lighter sparks come off of the player, but when that shield actually breaks, there will be a far more profound flash that takes place that is also accompanied by a much louder audio cue as well. And when you see blood spray out of that enemy, this means they have no shield at all. And when you guys are battling the Arc and begin to see sparks, fire, or smoke, this means the enemy is close to dead. This can be all the information you need to coordinate a push and potentially eliminate enemy teams or higher tier Arc threats. Our 20th and final tip might just be the most important one you hear all day, and that's how to get over gear fear. I heard a saying once that I really loved, and it was, at the end of the day, it's not your loot, it's just your turn to use it. Letting high tier loot waste away in your stash does nothing for you and just isn't fun. Plus, using better gear has noticeable effects on your survival rate because higher tier items are higher tier items for a reason, so you may as well use them. We also have crafting patterns, traders, and free loadouts that can restock us if things go wrong, so you really don't have that much to lose. Just go out there and have a good time gaming. And that's it! 20 tips everyone should know at level 1. I hope you found this guide useful, and if you have tips that weren't covered in this video, I'd love to hear more about them down in the comments below. Liking this video really does help the channel grow, and you guys can catch me live over at twitch.tv/above, where we'll be grinding like crazy all week long. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you topside.